these workshops. I think they're a perfect example of how different ways we can actually do some public engagement around digitized materials. And I believe it's definitely trying to serve as a model for all of us. And this is actually what I reference whenever people are thinking about digitization projects and how to get the public involved through these kind of discussions and workshops. So welcome to Creative Workshop number 4. So as mentioned, I am the postdoctoral fellow with Digital Library of the Caribbean, and I mostly lead programming and digitization with a partner in Haiti, Institut de Sauvegarde du Patrimoine National, and a local Miami artist incubator, Diaspora Vibe Culture Arts Incubator. So briefly, what I'm going to go over today, I'm just going to define the digital humanities very briefly, then provide you some examples of digital projects, digital humanities methods that are used in the humanities, and then I'll go over some free and open source digital storytelling tools that I use, and also some suggestions and resources. I'll make sure to have this PowerPoint available to Amali afterwards so she can share it with everyone. So what is digital humanities, also known as DH? Digital humanities takes the work already done in the humanities, that is research, teaching, and learning in areas like literature, history, and the arts, everything related to our past and present cultural heritage. But it does it in digital ways, such as making and using computer software, websites, mobile phone apps to teach or to help researchers learn. This is a definition by Dr. Amanda Visconti. I would say for me, and obviously for those of you here, the public component and engagement is actually what makes it very important to me. You can put things online, but how do people find them? How does it look like to engage the audience to let them know that these new digitized resources are available? So what does digital humanities actually look like? I'm actually gonna reference a few different potential websites so you can see as models for when you're creating your digital projects. And from there, you can kind of see what people are doing with all these digitized materials. So Digital Library of the Caribbean is where I currently work. It recently turned actually 16, so I have to update this. 16 years old, congrats. So it started with the founding with 9 partners. Now we have actually over 75, heading into 80 every single day. This changes. So we're always adding more and more partners around the United States, the Caribbean, Canada, Central, South America, and Europe. The Digital Library of the Caribbean is a repository, but a cooperative digital library for resources from and about the Caribbean. DLOC partners, most importantly, retain the rights to all of their materials, and we provide access to the digitized versions of Caribbean historical, cultural, and research materials that are currently held. Another part of the focus that I do specifically, and Miguel Asensio, who is the director of Digital Library of the Caribbean, also Lori Taylor, who's at University of Florida, which is the head of our technical unit for Digital Library of the Caribbean, and a number of others, Laura Perry, Chelsea Dinsmore as well, and more recently, Perry Collins, who actually helps us out with copyright. We actually do train on how to digitize materials. So it's not about kind of take materials up and available. We want to actually give the skills to the people in the Caribbean who need it most and who know the materials the most as well. And so we do frequent trainings in the Caribbean. That stopped, unfortunately, a little bit because of COVID, and we've had to rethink how we do training remotely, but training has been a very big emphasis in our program, specifically because we do want to develop the skills to teach our archivists and museum professionals, librarians on how to actually preserve and protect these materials while making it open access and available for researchers. So one of the projects I worked on, I want to say back in 2013, that's when I first kind of did some work with DLOC as a graduate student, is this digital humanities website, Haiti and Island Luminous. It's actually trilingual, that is, it is in Haitian Creole, French, and English. And it was to help readers learn about Haitian history. And this idea kind of came from myself, another graduate student, and a few others after the Haitian earthquake in 2010 to kind of address the need for digital resources, particularly coming from Haiti, but also like what way could we showcase this, these new digitized resources that were available? And so we created this website, Haiti and Island Luminous, and we got about 100 or so scholars to actually contribute different contributions, and we paired it up with digitized documents from the archives in Haiti or throughout wherever they were held as well. If the Duke University is a contributor because they had that huge Radio Haiti archive that is still there. And so this is kind of a page of how it looked like. I put my contribution, of course. And so the red actually kind of are keywords that link to content and different contributions from the 100 or so scholars. So each scholar had kind of a keyword that they can focus on. Mine was the International Exposition, which is one of Marcus's Haiti's participation in World's Fairs and Expositions. And I was able to do much of my research because of the resources available in Digital Library of the Caribbean at the time. And there's so much more now. I think we are up to about 4 million pages of digitized content now on the website. And we're getting another 800,000 from newspapers from Puerto Rico more recently, pre-1923. And this was made through a Council on Library and Information Resources grant. And so this is an example of kind of like a huge DH project with a number of collaborators. Like I said, there was 100 or so contributors, very huge to manage. And so what I always would recommend, now having been through the process, is that always kind of think of projects that kind of build into one another rather than, let me just do this all at once. And so also, if you're thinking about getting funding for your digital project, they can see that you're scaling it in different phases and pieces, right? So how do we go about creating digital projects? The next few slides are just gonna kind of go over just very functional ways and like how to organize your data. So unstructured data is information that either does not have a predefined data model or not organized in a predefined manner. So for example, a dissertation, and I feel like I'm hearing Stephanie, of course it's organized. No, it's unstructured. Unstructured meaning that it's not on a spreadsheet that you can use on a lot of these kind of free digital humanities tools that I'm going to show you in the next few slides or so. And so articles, books, dissertations, these are examples of unstructured data. And so usually before you start using these free tools that I'm going to show you, you do need to use what is called a CSV. Now, what is a CSV? It is comma separated values. These are plain text files. Since they are plain text, they are easier to import into a spreadsheet or another storage database regardless of the software you're using, right? It helps you organize this kind of large swath of data, and we use the CSV for the Island Luminous project. It also helps with the longevity of your data. So I know some of you probably have opened up an old document from 10 years ago, and then all of a sudden when you open it, you see these kind of strange figures and symbols, and it's not readable anymore, right? That is because Excel evolves and changes over time. However, if you put it in a CSV, it will be readable forever, right? So that's the kind of consideration to make when you are doing digital projects about the longevity of the project itself. And so CSV is probably the best way to actually store your data for its lifetime compared to like an Excel that you're using from 2012, and then next, right now, all of a sudden when you open it, it looks very strange. So. Now, some tools that you can actually use and that are majority free. I say majority because WordPress, it is free to a certain extent. And I believe if you have advertisements on it, they let it do for free. But, you know, if you're looking to create more of a bigger website or a professional page, there is a small fee for it each month. Omeca has a lot more features that you can use for digital exhibits, and this is free. However, I will say there are a lot more features that, if you have an institutional subscription, that open you up to different kinds of layouts and how you actually want to like visualize the project a little bit more. I do recommend Omeca for certain institutions that want to do kind of quick digital exhibits of their current materials. I won't say that it's necessarily very easy to use. It's okay. It's a little clunky. It takes some time to learn. But to be honest, with most of these tools, some of them are easier than others, or you'll find its kinks maybe later on as you're revising your project, and I'll continue to talk about that more. So Scalar is a popular one that is free and open source publishing platform that I recommend. I have used it myself. It's almost like a digital book. It actually looks very pretty, but it takes a while to get it to look to that state. I will say there's all these little like functions that you have to go roundabout or whatever. So I would encourage you, if you wanted to learn, Nathan Dyes is actually probably a good contact. And if you're interested in that information, I can tell you to contact him, and he can tell you how to use it a lot better than I can. And so for digital mapping, the tools that I listed here are free. And I would say only ArcGIS Story Maps has certain limitations until you get a subscription, but actually I think the free option is actually really nice. And so I recommend that. But I do mostly use Story Maps.js if I wanna do, like say I'm talking about an organization that has done a lot of artist incubation all throughout the Caribbean, and I want to show the artists that they've worked with in different islands. Story maps will be a great way to kind of convey that narrative, and you can put some images, you can put video, it's very interactive, and you can embed this on your website as well. It has the possibility for you to do that. And the way that it saves all your materials, it's all linked back to your Google account. So for that one specifically, you would have to use a Gmail account or create one. Google My Maps is another free tool, and I'll talk about my project that I've done with it. And I thought it was pretty cool, but you know, there's certain, with all of these, as I mentioned, there's certain limitations to them, right? And so Timelinejs and Time Mapper are also both free and open source, that you can create interactive timelines. You can add images, you can add video and narrative for free. Like I said, most of these that I'm emphasizing here today, majority are free to use. I will say with Timelinejs, in my experience, once you have done a project, always go back every few months just to check if it's functionally working, because sometimes the developer at Timelinejs will do some updates, and then for some reason the years in one of your one of the pieces that you have will be suddenly strange appearing, right? The video won't work, you know, something disconnects. So that's just something to kind of constantly check on to make sure that it's functioning properly. And I would recommend that for all these tools. You're never really finished with these projects. That's what I really learned in certain ways. You always have to consistently check on them, even when you think you're done, whatever that means, right? Especially if you're embedding it on your website, you want to make sure that it's appearing properly and that there's no like 404 sign or something that suddenly it's not working. So Timelinejs is one of those that you do have to check constantly. Another free one that I've learned about actually from my digital librarian is MyHistro, and you can kind of combine maps and timelines into your presentations. I haven't used it myself, but I was like, this looks super cool. If I want to actually do a lot more mapping kind of work, that would take me beyond kind of the Story Maps.js free version, right? And as I said, I'm going to make sure I have these slides available for everyone just in case I'm going too fast or whatever, and all the links will be available there as well. So that way, if you want to get started creating digital projects, you have these available to you. So here is also another free tool from the Night Lab. It's Night Lab also developed the Timelinejs tool and the story maps tool that I spoke about. So what's cool about this one, it helps storytellers compare two pieces of similar media, including photos, even GIFs. I think it's really great for highlighting kind of then and now stories, right? You want to show some slow changes over time, maybe the growth of a city, maybe some climate change, right? Maybe the borders or somewhere has been moving. So I would recommend using juxtapose so people can get like a good idea of what before and after looks like. And you can use it for different kinds of events as well. And I wanted to show you how Omeca looks like. So this is a Omeca site that I created while I was at the University of Miami for a Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, which nurtures Caribbean and Miami artists. So each link actually links to the artist. It tells you more about their biography, and it also shows some pieces of their work, right? As I mentioned, Omeca is one of these free open source web publishing tools for sharing digital collections and creating media-rich online exhibits. So this is, as far as the eye can see, Caribbean Art and Visual Culture was the one that we created while I was at the institution. And so the different things you can do, you can actually, because we had the institutional subscription, we got to play with the borders and stuff and the colors a little bit more. I think with the non-institutional version for individuals, they give you like a shorter selection. So you have to see once again, like what looks right for you and the project that you'd like to do. And I did mention Scalar, and so this is actually the website by Nathan Dyes that I recommended to look at, or reach out to him if you want to know more about Scalar. This one that he built specifically is about Saint-Domingue, Haiti, and imperial French narratives of the Haitian Revolution. And as I mentioned, it's one of these great platforms to kind of publish a digital book that can incorporate images, film, media. And I would say, they say with minimal technical expertise. I'm gonna say maximum patience though, right? So I wanna emphasize that. It's not the expertise. I would say it's the patience, because sometimes you think you do something, you press the button, and for some reason, the Scalar website just takes a while before it reflects it. And so you're there very like, I know I did this, how come it isn't showing up? I know I connected this properly, I read the instructions, and then it is working properly. It just takes a little time for it to show up in the system. So I would say patience more than technical expertise is required for using Scalar. And so here is actually the project that I did with Google My Maps, right, recently. It's called Mapping the Bicentennial International Exposition, Port-au-Prince, Haiti, 1949 to 1950. So as I mentioned, a lot of the work that I do was exploring Haiti's participation in world fairs and expositions. And through my research, I found out that Haiti had its own internationally recognized exposition in 1949. And throughout my research, I collected a number of images from my own personal archive, and also from archives throughout Haiti, Paris, the United States, Canada, a number of different places. And I wanted to get a sense of where everything was, because this area does not look like this now, right? And so, and people don't really have, unless you're above, I want to say 60 years old, you actually won't know where these areas were, right? A lot of these statues, a lot of this kind of cultural patrimony. And so what I did over the years, I started collecting a data set on a CSV, right? With their approximate locations. And whenever I did travel to Haiti, this area is actually cut off specifically since the earthquake, but let's just say I snuck in a few times and maybe took a few photos, right? Or had a friend maybe who I know goes around the area and got photos and collections from them about, you know, what it looks like, because there was only certain places I just couldn't access, unfortunately. And so because I had to kind of figure out and recreate much of where these pavilions were during the exposition, because you have to approximately over 75 to remember where these pavilions were, and actually had to attend the exposition. And so this is a very Port-au-Prince project, and because of most of the people that I interviewed in the United States from the Haitian diaspora, they were of the right age, but they didn't actually live in Port-au-Prince. It was very few of them who did. And so with the help of the few that did, I managed to relocate like where a lot of these statues were. In particular, there was a statue of Christopher Columbus that was dumped into the ocean after the dictatorship ended in 1986. It was dumped into the bay, right? And so I was like, okay, if it was dumped into the bay, I wonder if people have any images or something like that. I found out later on that they actually relocated it to the Bureau of Ethnology, and they surrounded it by voodoo spirits to kind of condemn Christopher Columbus, right? And so those are part of the images that I made sure to include as part of this collection of images about the area. And also because I work closely with ISPAN, who does a lot of the patrimonial heritage protection, I've let them know about these areas and see like, hey, this place is still here now. Could you give it an official designation, you know, just to make sure that it's part of our patrimonial registry, right? So hopefully there's plans to actually protect it at some point. But so also part of this is like I use different postcards, but you know, most of the time was spent figuring out where these places were, and Google Maps allowed me to do that piece by piece over the years. And so I can get a grasp of how the area looked then, and then even with my more recent photos, how it looks now. So juxtapose eventually will be another thing that I use so people can see it more directly. So for creating digital projects, I do have a few suggestions. If you do not have a digital humanities librarian, that's fine. Contact someone who's done a digital humanities project before, like something similar to what you're thinking of doing, right? It's always great to kind of find collaborators and through the process kind of think through what you'd actually like to do with your project, right? And even how to phase it out in different ways, right? You know, I always say, yes, go with the big idea, but plan one is this, and then this is part two, and this is part three. So that way it's a little bit more feasible on your part, depending on what you're doing. If you're a librarian, or if you're an archivist, or you're a professor, depending on your current workload, and just to kind of scale it for yourself, right? Have realistic project outcomes. The reason why I emphasize this is because working on the Island Luminous project, you know, you learn a lot of things along the way when you decide to do everything. That has its drawbacks. And so because you're trying to do everything, sometimes certain things get crammed and you don't feel like you do justice to the narrative as much as you would want, right? And so I would recommend with just doing smaller projects that once again build onto other ones, right? So the mapping project is something that I'm looking to build into something else that would be much bigger, right? Like, you know, specifically so people can see Haiti's exhibits at all of the World's Fairs is the ideal, but maybe I just focus on one exhibit at a time until I get the whole thing together, right? Also, this means identifying your audience very clearly. So for Haiti and Island Luminous, one of the things that we did, we connected with school teachers in the area in South Florida. We also placed exhibit stations in a number of museums at the Little Haiti Cultural Center, at Nova Southeastern Museum, St. La Haitian Community Center as well. So that way people who are getting kind of like social work done, they would just come in with their children and they would see the exhibit stand there, and they were able to, I think they've been using it for teaching Creole as well, like teaching Haitian history in Creole. So they've been using it in different ways, but it doesn't just stop there. I would say, as Amalia knows, engaging your audience is a continuous thing. It's, you know, so you have to plan carefully, like what does that look like for you? Who are you looking specifically to engage with? I know we say everyone, but it's not really everyone. Some people we want more targeted than others, right? And then eventually we do want everyone, but there's different ways of getting there, right? There's different stages and processes. And so another thing that we do, we participate every year in the Miami Book Fair, and also in the Little Haiti Book Fair as well. We also made sure that every single Caribbean Studies Conference, Haitian Studies Association Conference, ACURA, which is Association for Caribbean Universities, Institutions, and Research Libraries, we also make sure to talk about the project there, because, you know, there's going to be new people coming every single time, right? And so you want to tell them about the project, engage them with the project as much as possible. And, you know, having looked back, I wish we could do even more engagement, specifically on the K through 12 level, as much as possible. We do it just very informally at the moment. We have teacher trainings over the summer for Digital Library of the Caribbean, but sometimes it's 1 year it's Broward County Library Schools, and then 1 year it's Miami-Dade Library Schools. So I would actually like to reach kind of more beyond the South Florida area and kind of reach other diasporic Caribbean communities about these resources. And so you have to kind of think about ways of what does that look like. Maybe events at the embassies is something that we were talking about at some point, right? To maybe gather some diasporic peoples, so that way they can engage in the materials that are digitized in the Caribbean. So it's in the pipeline. I'm not sure when that will happen, but it's there. And so these are some resources actually also that I put together. That camp actually kind of teaches you how to use a lot of these digital tools specifically. Digital Humanities Summer Institute is another place where you can kind of like build your digital humanities skills. Haystack also has a number of different blogs where you can actually learn how to use them as well. As we mentioned, Digital Library of the Caribbean could serve as a resource. I would also mention Early Caribbean Digital Archive as well is another great resource. Reviews in Digital Humanities is another place where you can actually find what digital projects are being worked on and what they look like and people reviewing them. And if you want to learn more hands-on about how to use different tools, I also recommend the Programming Historian, which is actually now in English, French, and Spanish. And so it seems like they're looking to kind of increase the people that are able to participate and give these tutorials. And the tutorials are actually peer-reviewed as well. So to kind of help this kind of facilitation of research and teaching.